Shanti Prima Satya Ahimsa. Dharma Shanti Prima Satya Ahimsa. Dharma Shanti Prima Satya Ahimsa.
Hi, Ramal. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a group of wonderful panelists who are here with us today, who are here to share their thoughts and their expertise on how technology affects development. So if each panelist could just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Sairam, everybody. My name is Jayanti Srinath. I'm a physical therapist, live in Dallas, Texas. I've been here for the last 7 years, been practicing physical therapy for over 20 years. I'm here to share my knowledge with you guys about, the effects of media on physical development.
Sairam, my name is Disha Mudulardu. I'm an occupational therapist. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, but currently I'm working in school systems. I work with children with fine motor and sensory needs. So this gives me a good perspective. I'm here to share effects of technology use on children's sensory systems and their fine motor development.
Sairam, I'm Soumya Panchanathan. I'm a pediatrician. I've been working in the ambulatory space, in the clinic space, for the last, about 20 something years. And I will be sharing about the effects of technology on cognitive development as well as emotional and social development. Sairam.
Sairam, my name is Ramya Kumar and I'm a speech language pathologist. I am in Phoenix, Arizona. And I've been a speech pathologist probably almost 11 years at this point. I have pretty much been in pediatrics, primarily a little bit of adults here and there. And also right now I specialize more in infants and infant development. So my role on this panel is to talk about the effect of technology on how our speech language development is happening and what is being hindered as well as some of our social emotional regulation. Sairam.
Thank you all for those wonderful insights into the work that you do. So just to set the stage a little bit, this is something Rami and I were talking about in the early stages of kind of figuring out what this workshop is going to look like. And our discussion was kind of understanding how technology has helped humans evolve in our own evolution. And growing up, this typical model of like what evolution looks like was shown to us students in science class. And, the typical model, it looks like, we are rising from this kind of crouched over position as like monkey type primates. And then it transforms into us walking straight into modern day human being. But there's a new version of this model that I've been seeing circulating around a lot more frequently. And the latest stage, it's kind of including after we are walking straight, includes us kind of hunching down once more over our cell phones and our technology that we're using. So as somebody who is guilty of doing this, I was just wondering what is happening here. One word I've been hearing specifically is tech neck, which is describing this prominent position in which we hold our heads as we bend down over our personal devices. So what does this really mean for our physical development? Jayanti, if you could maybe get us started in thinking about that.
Yes. So what exactly is tech neck? It is a term that has been derived from the way we hold our heads when we are using your iPads or your laptops or your cell phones. So we are born, believe it or not, our spines are not exactly straight. You have what is called a C curve. So in your neck, and the whole spine is like an S curve. So you have a curve that goes concave in the neck, outside by your mid back, and then goes back in your low back and comes back out in your sacrum, which is the very end of your spine. So what happens over a period of time when you, okay, by the way, your head weighs about 8 to 10 pounds. So your body is working constantly, your neck muscles work constantly to hold your head up against gravity. So your neck muscles have to do a lot of work to hold them in place. Hold your head in place. So if you start thinking about bringing your head here at the angle that it is normal, it is about 10 pounds, right? But if you start bringing your head forward 15 degrees, it's about 27, 30 pounds. Then a little more, it's about 40 pounds. Then 45-degree angle, it's about 50 pounds. And then at 60-degree angle, you're talking about 60 pounds. So you are making your neck muscles work so hard against gravity, and the muscles in the front have started becoming tight over a period of time. So you've developed this posture that your head is like this. That is what they're calling as a tech neck, which means your neck is constantly in this position. So what happens to the physical development when a child maybe is not using it as often as some of our adults, but over a period of time, the child himself or herself will develop what is called a functional scoliosis, which means it's not structural. The child was not born with the abnormal curve in the spine, but because the muscle imbalances, muscles in the front getting tight, muscles in the back getting overstretched, they develop what is called a functional scoliosis, which causes them to have pain when they go up to do like any physical activity, go play sports or anything else that they have to use their head upright. They start having muscle aches. They start having pain in their neck, shoulders, and arms. Some adults will complain of also neck nerves impingement, which will pain down the arms, so things like that. So that is definitely going to impact a child's physical development.
Really quickly, would any other panelists like to add their thoughts on this? And Adisha, I know you had some points about thinking about how this affects our vision and eyesight. Would you be able to share a little bit on that?
Sure. So our bodies are meant to interact in a 3D world. We see things in 3D, we need to see it in movement, and our eyes actually need to adjust from like focal point nearby to far and vice versa very quickly. So that those exercise our eye muscles. And so for now, kids are staring at their screens for a prolonged amount of time. And so those muscles are getting atrophied. They're not being used at so much. And so when, law of nature, if you don't use it, you lose it. So I see so many kids that I work with, they're getting glasses now because their focal point is just about a foot away from them for such a long period of time. So that's definitely agreeable. I see so many kids with sensory needs now because they're not getting that movement. They're not sitting upright. They're sitting, slouchy. And so big difference for sure for using so much technology in kids.
Something else that I share with some of my patients is, I don't know if you all have heard about the 20-20-20 rule. That is something that the American Optometry Association and American Academy for Ophthalmology very often share with people who work in the tech field or who are staring at computers, or it can be your desktop or your laptop. So what does that mean, 20-20 rule? So if you're looking at your laptop or your desktop for 20 minutes at a time, they say to take a 20-second break and look at an object that is 20 feet away from you. So it decreases the strain in your eyes. So just to decrease the strain in your eyes, it can be children, it can be adults, anybody. Please follow the 20-20-20 rule. Thank you.
Great suggestion.
I love that. And that's just so relevant, like you said, to no matter who you are, if you're a student or a parent or whoever, like you're going to need that rule, especially in the world that we're living in right now. And that's actually a perfect segue, I would say, into our next question.
So Namu, I have something to add before you segue.
Yes.
Sorry, because I know
go ahead.
We don't always think about impact of this necessarily on speech language, but one of the areas that speech pathologists specialize in, which actually I do, is in feeding and swallowing, which our posture directly impacts that. And especially in pediatrics, one of the phrases we use frequently is ability at the lips comes from stability of your hips. So hips before lips. And so that's another piece. Again, if your head and neck posture isn't great, it is going to impact how you chew, how you swallow, how you manipulate food in your mouth, but also the attention that you have during a mealtime and how much quicker you might fatigue. So I know we covered some things in Sidetrack episode 1 related to meal times, but this is another aspect to think about as well that posture can impact.
So getting into a little bit of our next question here and just switching gears and thinking a little bit more about the cognitive side of development. So there have been studies looking at this impact of technology on our cognitive skills. When we were first talking, Soumya, you mentioned how your granddaughter has been going between faces on a 2D screen and then interacting with them 3D. And I was just wondering, what kind of developmental changes are occurring as children are immersed in this 2D world. So if you would be able to share your thoughts a little bit more on that.
So I think one of the first things is we are meant to be in a 3D world. And most babies prior to this year, most babies were recommended and had very little of 2D interaction with real people. So even kids who were watching TV or something, they weren't really interacting with it as real people. So and if they saw somebody on a video screen or a FaceTime or something, they had already interacted with them in 3D. They had touched them, they had felt them, they had been hugged by them, all of those things. And then they saw them in 2D. And what was really striking in this particular case with my granddaughter is she has a very different reaction when she has actually seen the person in 3D and then she sees them in 2D versus the other way around. So, and that happened recently with her uncle, which is my son. She had seen him in 2D and then saw him in real life, touched the screen and then touched his face and was so excited after that when she saw him in 2D again, because now she knows that was a real person. So I think this linking of an image with a real person is happening in a different way. Now, because these real people in their lives, they're only seeing them as 2D people. So I have to say that this is definitely changing how they are developing. I can't say for sure what this is going to mean like 2, 3, 4 years down the road, but I think it's really important, therefore, to ensure that they have enough interaction of 3D stuff and really drop down the 2D other parts of their experiences. So, I mean, the American Academy of Pediatrics really says no screen time before age 2, which clearly, if we want them to interact with their grandparents and their uncles and their aunts and all the extended family, that's not realistic. But I think if we can diminish all of the other amount of screen time in order to prioritize the relationships, I think that would be something I would suggest.
From a speech pathology perspective, even pre-COVID, right, we were definitely seeing an increase in speech language delays, and specifically in what we call expressive language. So we have receptive language, which is our understanding of things. And that was okay. We weren't seeing too many delays in that area. But in our expressive language or our speech and our talking, we were definitely seeing a lot more referrals, a lot more delays with the increase in screen time, device use. So even things like, sight words or first words, there's all these apps, there's Baby Einstein, there's, all kinds of things that are supposed to be educational. But exactly like Soumya was saying, when you don't have that interactive piece in 3D and you're not taking that 2D world into a 3D world and, touching, feeling. So even a ball, for example, it's very different to look at a picture of a ball or even swipe around it, or even watch a video of somebody else throwing it, as opposed to you touching and feeling it, throwing it to somebody else, waiting for someone to catch it, the patience that builds, the cause and effect that builds. That person holds it. You may need to say more, please, or throw it back to me, throw a ball, person throws it back to you. So that is how a lot of our speech and language skills develop. And when we are kind of focused in on the screen and not getting that three-dimensional input, that really impacts how our brain is developing. The other part of that too is there have been some studies done. Even our toys are becoming a lot more noisy almost. So even if it doesn't have a touch screen, it's got a lot of bells and whistles and you poke this button and that squeaks and all of that. When you have a toy that has increased volume or noise or interaction, that automatically decreases the amount of conversation or input the parent in that room or the caregiver in that room is going to provide, because the toy is doing it for you. So now that's going to limit the human interaction. And again, the toy or the screen is not going to give the child that silence or that moment of like pausing to see what the reaction is going to be, or even tailoring the response based on what the child is saying or doing. It's pretty scripted, or it just happens in real time. And so as a result of that, we are seeing some definitely delays, and also some delays in our social language, or what we call pragmatics. Just knowing how to pick up on body language, facial cues, silence, and then knowing how to respond to that appropriately are things we're seeing as well. We don't really talk enough about the impact of technology on our hearing, which also affects our speech and our communication development. So with the increase in devices, we've also seen increase in earbud usage. And so that is really impacting a lot of our hearing, our auditory processing. More and more children are complaining of that ringing sound in their ear because of how loud those earbuds are sitting in there and the prolonged use of that. So one of the things that audiologists and speech pathologists recommend is, if you have earbuds on, decrease your volume to 50%, and then make sure you have designated listening breaks to take those off, again, reset, get up, move, do other things, and then come back to what you're doing. So I think that's a valuable tip for all of us as well, as we're doing work from home and having to be on Zoom all day long. So.
I can chime in with the sensory part of using too much technology. I see, I work in the school system, so I see many kids who have returned back from virtual learning. And so now they've returned back, they are a little bit behind their peers in what Ramya was saying, in joint attention. They are not able to keep their body still and attend to the teachers talking in front of the classroom. And you would think that has part, has to do with attention, but it actually also has to do with the sensory integration. So just like we have our 5 senses, our eyes, ears, nose, we have senses in our body, in our joints. So there's sensory systems in our joints, between our ears, that kind of tell our bodies where we are in space. Is our head leaning sideways? Am I leaning on something? How far is a certain object from me so I don't run into it as I walk next to it in a hallway? I see many kids who spend so much time on technology bumping into objects, not being able to sustain their stamina to play for 30 minutes on a playground, just because they don't get to have that outlet for all that built up energy. I see so many emotional struggles as well. They hold all that energy in, and then I see outbursts in the class because they can't express themselves. Coming again to Ramya and your point, they're not able to express their feelings, that they have all that built up energy. They have anger bursts, they have frustrations. If you're working at a computer for an hour, take a 15-minute break, get up, play some games. We had our basement set up. So we had our table for working, and then we had board games where, you're using your fine motor skills, where we had dartboard and cornhole and all that stuff, where we're still interacting, playing games physically, taking breaks after we're sitting for so long. Probably about every hour, we kind of got up and did something physical, which really worked well for our family.
So thank you all so much for those awesome insights. And I feel like this is, I think it's a perfect way to kind of start thinking about our next question, which is, as you've all talked about, like the familiarity of using technology and how we can use it as a tool. There are especially young students who are just so familiar and comfortable with our touch screens, way more than I am at this point. So as devices and using them even in children's toys become so much more popular, is it okay to just be swiping across the surface all day within just that motion itself? So are we at risk of anything developmentally wise through that motion?
I can chime in for that. So I work with kids with fine motor delays in school system. But see, especially this year, I see so many kids struggling with how to hold a pencil, and especially for the young ones, pre-K, kindergarten, because they're so used to just swiping everything. So they're really strengthening their index finger, but they don't know that the grasp really, your thumb is the main component. So thumb, which is a bigger part of holding something, that's where your muscles are stronger, is really getting weaker. And so when it comes to holding a pencil, they can't coordinate, the grasp is all off, and obviously the handwriting is off. But in the grand scheme of things, really, how important is handwriting, really? But if you really take a step back and look at what is being affected, kids are having a hard time buttoning, zipping, tying their shoes, cutting. All of those are just life skills that they need, but everything is delayed because of constant swiping of things and strengthening the wrong muscles in your hand. So definitely, if you are, in front of a screen that long and are having to just type or swipe, play some fine motor games, like do some knitting, make a bracelet, play board games with small pieces, really work your fine motor skills, do a craft, have your children do crafts. So those are all great ways to still be, keep your fine motor skills strengthened and still be, doing what you need to with the screen.
And how many of us just use one hand for every activity around the house? There are so many tasks that we have to have by manual. You have to use both your arms. Now, if you do just this all day long and not use this one, or even this all day long and not use this, there's so many things that the child is missing on. So yes, I completely agree with Disha on whatever she said, but I just wanted to add that one point.
Like everything that we have in our house is kind of made for us to engage in instantly. There's no wait period for us to go through. So whether that's just having fast speed internet, whether that's, having an Instant Pot where we can just automatically cook something within 20 minutes, like it's there and it's done for us. And this is really relevant, right? Because so recently in Texas, we had that winter storm that just happened, and many of us went without power, electricity, and critical essential things that, technology that we took for granted. And so that was really emphasized during that 1 week. And there was a lot of impatience and anger and frustration that emerged during that week. I can personally attest to that. And Swami has emphasized the importance of maintaining patience no matter the situation. So, something I'm thinking about now is like, what is that correlation between using technology and how that might impact our emotions, such as patience?
So I'm going to start with something that has just happened in our house. Our water heater decided it didn't want to work. And the person came on, I think, last Monday, and he said, I'm not going to have a part for 5 days. And so we have had to actually not get hot water from our tap. We take these things for granted. And, it's okay if something takes a little bit longer. We're learning that patience. And I think sometimes Swami gives us experiences that actually teaches us, well, it's okay if you don't get it right away. In fact, we even went on Amazon to see whether it could be delivered immediately. And I think that's the other way in which we really express our need for instant things. How many of us say, what, it's going to take 3 days? I need it today. So, but in terms of impatience, even just things that take longer to download, that buffer instead of it being instantly on screen, all of these things are tests of our patience. And many of us have gotten out of the habit of waiting for things. And so I think this is actually something I would say is really, really important, not only for all the children, but particularly for teenagers, because I think as you get older and as you get used to things being there at your fingertips when you want them, as you ask for them, I think that can lead to the impatience and the lack of slowing down. We have sped up, and as soon as we ask for something, it seems to need to be there. And I think this is a time when perhaps one of the lessons to be learned is that slowing down, that patience.
One thing that many of you may not be familiar with is when we use technology, and like we've been talking, just that instant gratification, right? You touch the screen, something happens. You click on it, high-speed internet, something happens. That actually gives us a rise in what's called dopamine into our brain. So it actually creates this form of addiction that we do something and we immediately get rewarded. It actually changes hormonally. The other part of it is also what's called neural pruning, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's like pruning a grapevine or a tomato vine, where in order for the flowers to actually bloom or like, form fruit, you have to take away parts that aren't being used. And so that's actually how our brain forms as well. So it's this whole theory of use it or lose it. So parts of our brain that we're stimulating continue to grow or are stimulated, grow richer, and parts that we're not using slowly deplete over time because they just don't need to be used. And there's so much more that our brain needs to do, even just physical volume, all of that. So what we're seeing again with a lot of children is because of instant gratification, the centers in the brain that are getting fired are those that are instant gratification and reward immediately. That's also what video games and all that are built off of. So we're actually not developing patience. And then in the brain center, those areas are actually shrinking and fading away. So that's the other place where I say trick the algorithm. So if we intentionally build in activities where you have to pause, you have to wait, you have to wait for that response to happen. Those are ways, again, the brain is pretty amazing and can restructure itself if we feed it the right amount of things that we need. So that's kind of a biological explanation as well on the back end of what might be happening. And also, like, I think there's a lot of famous people have said, boredom is actually the space in which creativity happens, imagination happens. If we're not bored and we don't have a minute to pause, we're not thinking of what we can do. So it's okay to have those moments of silence, even though as parents, you might be nervous if you hear quiet and you're wondering what your kids are doing. Chances are, if you go and peek, and Disha, you can probably attest to this with your kids as well, who are young, they're probably coming up with some really creative, logical solution for something that results in having to wait and think critically. So.
Yes, and yes.
Thank you all for those thoughts. I feel like next time I'm bored, I'm really like, okay, this is great. I can be creative now. And switching gears just a little bit here. Swami says that watching TV affects the way that we view the world. So the scenes, thoughts, and actions that fill the minds of the viewer, and unknowingly we get these sort of ill feelings, such as impatience, but especially anger that emerges. And there's been studies to support this, and that that correlates technology use, specifically playing video games and watching media content that has violence in it, with increased aggression in children and teenagers. And I've experienced this myself when I'm listening to a song that's particularly aggressive in nature. So, in just your thoughts on how might this technology, be used to affect our emotion and our emotional and our social selves. I know you've already touched on it a little bit, but if you could expand a little bit more on that.
So one of the things that children, as they're developing, when they see a video game where someone dies, they shoot somebody and somebody dies, the person died in the video game, but kids do not make the connection that in real life they stay dead. In the video game, they pop back up, or the next screen comes and someone who looks just like that comes up. So that connection between death in a video game and death in the real world just doesn't happen. And so I think even the aggressive tendencies that you might have, which are increased after this, the consequences of that to the other person, to yourself, all of that, those natural consequences don't really follow through because you're doing it in a virtual world. If you hit somebody and you see that, like, even if you were aggressive in the real world, which you shouldn't be, but if you were, you would see that the other person, I don't know, bled, fell down, said, ouch, whatever. And you have a chance to be empathetic and feel their pain and then change your response and change your behavior the next time. But when in a video game, none of that happens. And so I think that is one of the big problems with violent video games, it isn't just that you're increasing the violent tendencies, you're changing that cause and effect and empathetic response that could develop in the purest sense when they see that what happens to the other person when they're violent. That's one thing. The other thing is going back to the sedentariness of being in this virtual space. One of the best releases for anger and frustration is exercise. And specifically actually exercise and dance, because dance has music plus exercise. And I think both of those are even better than either one separately, but any of those are great expenders of that aggressive energy. And I think that with the sedentary nature of being using technology a lot, that also happens less. So they are exposed to more aggressive content. They have less of an opportunity to be empathetic, and they have less of an opportunity to get rid of that violent or aggressive energy. So I think all of these three things have a very easy fix, and that is, what kind of content are you watching, and be active. And I think the practice of empathy still has to be in our 3D world.
So I wanted to share an example. I had a patient a few years back who came to me for treating tremors. So tremors are, when your hands are shaking. And so when I'm looking at the report and the referral, there's nothing in the report about any kind of neurological link to it. Usually tremors are caused by some kind of a neurological deficit. Something happened that's, making your muscle uncontrollable. So nothing in the report like that, and MRIs are clear. So I had no idea why this child is having tremors. So doing a little bit of digging, asking the family what his daily activities are like. Is it an injury? What is it? I came to find out that he was addicted to playing this very violent video game. And this is where, they're in the war zone, kids are shooting, or people, whatever, the characters are shooting at each other. And he's, you're the person playing the video game, he's the controller, he's in the situation, he's a character in that scene. And so if you really think about it, our brains don't really know when you're in the situation and in that scenery, is it a real world or is it a fake world? And this is one of the reasons why we cry in movies, because when we're emotionally vested into the scenery, this role, our bodies, our brains are thinking we're actually in it. And so this kid, if you think about the scene and the game that he was playing, it's virtually suffering from PTSD. After he's done playing the video game, he was in that constant stress. Anytime he heard a boom, that triggered a tremor. So this is what this little kid's brain was under, this kind of stress 24/7. And so that developed into a muscle tremor. So working with kind of removing that video game out of his life and kind of putting let's hold off on that for a few months, really took care of those tremors. That was all that it really needed. But imagine, kids playing these kind of video games, watching whatever, who knows what. They don't really know if it's real, if it's a 2D world, if it's a 3D world, because your brain, your emotions, everything is connected to what you're seeing and where you are in that situation. So it's really, really important. Swami says, it's not just what you eat from your mouth that is your food. It's everything you take in from your senses. It's what you hear, what you see. So really, really important to watch what kids are doing.
I feel like that makes a lot of sense, what everybody's just been talking about, and especially at the end there, right? Just understanding the balance that we need to create within that 2D versus 3D world. So as we are coming to the close of this session, if everybody could just leave the audience, with just one tip and strategy to keep in mind, that would be really great. And so just thinking about, what steps can we be taking to be cognitively and physically healthy? And are there any steps that families can take together?
One thing I really suggest, if from anything you have taken from this discussion, is that have a balance for your kids. If they are learning virtually right now, make sure you give them breaks in the day. Every hour that they're in front of a screen, make them play something physical, go out and run around the yard, whatever resources you have.
One thing I would suggest is play together, whether it's physical play, like energetic physical activity play, or board games, because it is a shared time of enjoyment of each other. When children see that their parents enjoy them, that is a very valuable gift.
Well, one more thing that I would like to add for us parents, like Dr. Soumya was saying, parents and children, exposure to nature. Take them outside. Colors in the nature, textures in the nature is going to be a big part of their development.
What I would like to leave everyone with is, I always say behavior is communication. So it's very easy for us to get frustrated with others, or when somebody throws a tantrum or has a behavior outburst, child or adult. But nobody typically just wakes up that morning saying, today I'm going to have a tantrum. Try to find the root issue of what's happening, whether that's they just listened to a song that stimulated an emotion, or they haven't been outdoors to get their wiggles and jiggles out. So again, just breaking down to figure out, why is that behavior happening?
Thank you guys so much. You've been wonderful. I feel like I've learned so much personally about just the ways and the extent in which technology shapes our experiences, shapes our world, our development. And I feel like this point that was really brought up at the end was just understanding how can we, ensure that we're still having that heart-to-heart connection, that interaction, that balance in our lives. So thank you all again for joining us today. And thank you, Swami, for putting this wonderful panel together and allowing us the space to connect.